We're walking through defining different parts of our model. In the last couple lessons, we talked about how do we define our value metric as well as our price structure, the different features within our structure, which helps us define kind of like the what part of the model. What are we charging for? In this lesson, we want to talk a little bit more about the price amount, right? How much are we charging? And we do that by trying to get a sense for something that we call willingness to pay. This helps us understand how much of price amount someone is willing to pay for that value, which is a combination of that value metric as well as that structure, the features that we include. When surveying or asking customers or our target audience around pricing, we often go to them and ask the question, how much would you pay for this? The problem is that it doesn't tell us much. Users have a really hard time pinpointing a number or understanding a product in context, and they almost always skew on the low side when answering this question. So what we use instead is a method called the Van Westendorp price sensitivity meter. So we're going to walk you through a little bit step by step on how to execute this at a high level. We're going to be using the example product of Drift. Drift is a chatbot product for sales and marketers. So the first step of what we would do when running this analysis is that we would put a description of the product in front of the users, something similar to this, where you can see Drift is a messaging app for sales and customer success teams. They have live on-site chat and in-app messaging, as well as a bunch of features around profiles and auto calendar scheduling. Now, once they kind of get a description or a context for what the product does, we put in front of them what's included in the pricing tier, but not the actual price. So as you can see here, a standard plan, 5 seats, 1,000 contacts, and what features are included in this plan. We're then going to ask them a series of 4 different questions. The first, at what price would you consider the product to be so expensive that you would not consider buying it? We call this the too expensive data point. The second question is, at what price would you consider the product to be priced so low that you would feel the quality wouldn't be very good? This is called the too cheap data point. The third question is, at what price would you consider the product starting to get too expensive so that it is not out of the question, but you would have to give it some thought buying it? This is called not a bargain. And the last, at what price would you consider the product to be a bargain, a great buy for the money? This is called the not expensive line. Now, everybody's going to be entering dollar values as answers to these questions. What we then do is we convert it into a graph and chart that looks like this. Now, this might be a lot to take in at first, but let me explain it in a little bit more detail. We took the dollar value answers to each of those questions and plotted them out as percentage curves. So the way to read this, for example, the orange line, which represents the responses to the not expensive question, is that at about $15, about 90% of the respondents thought that that price point at $15 was not expensive. We could also do this again for something like the green line, which is the too expensive line. What you'll see here is that at about $30 of price point, about 50% of the responses thought that $30 price point was too expensive. Now, there's a bunch of different data points around this chart, and there's a lot that has been written and analyzed about how to interpret these different values. But the most important thing is what is called the range of acceptable prices. That is the intersection of the too cheap and not a bargain curve and the intersection of the not expensive and too expensive curve. This gives you a range of values that you can use as the hypothesis for the pricing for this specific tier. You can take this range of acceptable prices and start to segment it on different values. And so what you'll see here is you'll come up with, based on those segments of personas or other things that you segment on, you'll end up with different price ranges and start to get a sense for how users and how different segments of your users would essentially think about the price in relative terms to it being too cheap or too expensive and what the right price point is. You can then use these different ranges as well as these different data points to layer on a qualitative layer of reason, basing on all of the other information you have, your market, your model, and anything else and other data that you might have within your retention cohorts and revenue cohorts to come up with a final price. Once again, it's not perfect, but this is much better than guessing or just copying from a competitor. We're actually basing our decision off of first principles reasoning based on data from our target audience. In the next section, we're going to start talking about the last layer of the monetization pyramid, the optimization layer.